Welcome back to Ambivalent Offenders. This is Jamie. I want to welcome all our listeners here to this technically Patreon-only episode. We are releasing a short segment, about 15 to 20 minutes, that is available to all our listeners since we know it's been a little bit of a time. But if you want to listen to the entire about 1.5 hours, so plenty more to discuss, you can join us on our Patreon page. We have 2 tiers, including $3 a month. You do get the first week free, so you can see if you like that content. Our Patreon is linked in the show description, so please join us there if you would like to hear the entirety of the episode, as well as other new content and discussions regarding the episodes of Love Story. We are going to be doing a series on Patreon for that. Anyways, enjoy.
Welcome back, patrons. After a brief winter hiatus, we are back in 2026. Yay.
Yeah.
Yay. We can't wait to get more content and more history to you all. We have a lot of exciting plans, including some more Kennedy content. That's going to be a little bit of a teaser. I mean, you already seen the title of this. It's felt like a lifetime ago when we spoke about Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. Their dog years are their podcast years. Feels like at least 50 years ago in podcast years, we did that 2-part series on Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. And she's now in the news and all over pop culture, all over your TikTok feed, if you're like me, thanks to Love Story on FX and Hulu. We know a lot of new listeners are finding us now after watching the first few episodes. So we wanted to circle back to Carolyn's story and do some re-examination, a little bit of debunking, some general thoughts on the series, and the Ryan Murphy of it all. We have a lot of thoughts.
And I say, I'm just going to get my initial Ryan Murphy out. I do want to acknowledge Aaron. And for our new listeners, that was one of our earlier episodes. It was definitely one that I knew nothing about when it came to Carolyn, besides her untimely death, of course, just like photographs. So I feel like it was such a great series to be able to learn much more about who she was as a person, because I feel like so much that comes out in the media or what people see is a very different version of Carolyn. And so we'll discuss here in the show, do we think the new show, Love Story, what version of Carolyn is that portraying? Do we think that's true to who she was?
Well, she's an enigma. She's mysterious because we have maybe 2 clips of her ever speaking. So a lot of people don't even know what she sounds like. That has created this mystique, this mystery over the last, 2.5 decades since she died. What we see is usually just her outfits, her style, which again is back in the news and all of your Instagram, all over your TikTok, people recreating the outfits from Love Story and some of her more famous outfits. I do think there's always been an idea of who is this woman who married America's most eligible bachelor. Ever since she appeared on the scene, people have been trying to figure out who is this woman, and we're still doing it how many years later.
Yeah. And I know, and I don't want to say too much here in the intro, but I know you and I have talked and made some comparisons to her and Meghan Markle. Obviously, it's a very different world here in the 2020s versus in the 90s, but that treatment by the press about these, in these cases, 2 boys, who lost parents at very young ages, and there's that overprotectiveness of the public eye, and they always remain, like I said, these boys. I think it's really interesting to see some of those parallels because Meghan, and again, I don't want to go too much into it because I know we're going to go later, but on one end, I feel like Meghan's been pretty, obviously, post-royalty, moving to America, been very open and talkative. And it makes me wonder what Carolyn would have been like in today's world with all the technology and the ability to share her own story versus just the paparazzi sharing her story if she got more ownership over it.
Yeah, you do wonder. Or we talked about in the series, as it approached 98, 99, that in some ways she was feeling a little bit better about things. You see her more open with the press as they're at events. If she would have ever gotten less private, more okay with the public eye and telling her story, how it had been to date and marry America's prince.
And she was so young. I have to keep reminding myself, us as two 37-year-olds, I'm like, she had passed by then. Her story, dating JFK Jr., marrying him, and all of that drama all happened, in a very short amount of time. She never made it to 37.
It's a very abrupt end where then it's just nothing. And I mean, I think we can dive in because we will talk about how even in the years since there's been a hesitation, especially for those close to her, to speak. And you can contrast that with some of John's friends. We will get into all of that because that is on my list.
When you said that with the end, part of me thought about, obviously, the famous lines from Hamlet, but having just watched Hamnet for like the millionth time, just thinking with their ends, the rest is silence, for her on her end. We don't have diaries and suddenly all this social media or things like that to suddenly be able to go back and tell who this person is. Although, obviously, big hint, not even hint, but a big piece here is that you read the biography that the show is loosely based on, which really is, when you say, the definitive biography on her.
I think it's the only, people correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure you will. I think it's the only biography on her, not just a joint biography. It's Once Upon a Time, The Captivating Life of Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. Once I had read beforehand and seen in the credits that that was going to be the source material, that made me breathe a little bit of a sigh of relief, because we talked about it when we did the episode. That book is a much more sympathetic look at Carolyn, much more sympathetic to Carolyn than books in the past. Most of these tell-all books and biographical books on the couple were written by, as I said, JFK Jr.'s friends. Those books basically became the default narrative because so many of Carolyn's close friends chose to stay silent over the years. And that silence created this vacuum where John's friends could say whatever they wanted, and they did. And in a lot of ways, to canonize John, they put a lot of the blame of the stress of those later years on Carolyn. And that's where you get those rumors that we've all heard.
Women and wives, they make the easy targets, right?
Yeah, they're the scapegoats. That's where you get the drug stuff, she's an ice queen, and all of that stuff has been so difficult to shake. If you're like me and you see on Instagram a thing about Carolyn's style and you pull up those comments, half of them will be fawning over the style and half of them will say, "Why are you talking about this woman? She was awful. She made John's life a living hell." You'll see those in any article or Instagram post or TikTok about Carolyn. She can't escape it.
That's always shocked me. At the time when we did the original podcast, I had no clue that she was villainized as she was. I knew that she was more of an enigma. People didn't know much about her. She just seemed like, I don't want to say a figurehead, but kind of like a Jackie O, somebody who is very iconic for their style. But again, Jackie O was never somebody who was going to go out and like, let me give you all the dirt on JFK or things like that. I didn't realize there was so much vitriol in her direction. That was shocking to me.
Again, I think it is a lot to prop up him. We know that there were issues with the marriage towards the end. A lot has been made about, were they close to divorce? None of us know. We don't know what would have happened if they had lived. A lot of the vacuum has been filled by John's friends, and some of them just didn't like Carolyn and had good reasons to not like her in some cases because she was suspicious of people she thought were using him. She got really good at spotting the men and women who weren't true friends the couple could trust. And she became very astute in sniffing out those friends she thought weren't true friends. So if John was overly trusting of people in some ways, Carolyn was the opposite. I do think the show has done a good job in sort of reconciling the stories that you get of the people who did know her, and you've seen a lot of them start to come out of the woodwork as the show has premiered, starting to share their stories, whether they worked with her at Calvin Klein or encountered her earlier in life. They all say the same thing about how warm she was, that she was such a good conversationalist, how smart she was. She had that ineffable charisma that
Yeah.
Some people do, and they always say that never translates in pictures.
Pictures are static.
And you also see some of her pictures. She looks so different in every single picture.
Yeah.
She's really a shapeshifter in that way.
Right. I know after watching one of the early episodes, which we'll talk about other things we're going to do with Love Story for Patreon. So spoiler again, a little bit there. But remember reading an article, I think it was on people.com, about people who had worked with her at Calvin Klein. And even if she didn't know you, as a friend or only saw you occasionally, that she was always very gracious and somebody who would say hi and go out of her way to be kind. I think that says a lot, especially in high fashion.
That's not something you usually think of in the fashion world. And you really do rarely get anybody saying anything unkind about her.
Especially, again, you're talking high fashion in the 90s with these beautiful people, big egos. With any story that you would hear that would be negative, I feel like you'd hear way more negative about anybody just because of the cutthroatness. So the fact that the stories are overwhelmingly positive towards her, I think that's depicted from what we've seen in the show to be 100% on brand, I would say, with that. I think that tells us something about her character, because she certainly didn't have to do that. It seemed like she was a rising star. Somebody like that doesn't have to be super nice to everybody around them. They can be selectively nice, and that's typically what happens. I think being, I don't want to say a muse, but somebody who was very much, as she started dating JFK Jr., and I don't know if I'm getting too ahead, so tell me if you want to save this for later, but somebody who was very much known for her fashion. There is part of an objectification of that, right? It's like you are wearing the clothes, or are the clothes wearing you?
I like that this show captures this version of her that we might not have seen if the show was made like 10 years ago. You get the fun Calvin Klein era that so many people are drooling over on TikTok. That carefree side of Carolyn before she became tabloid fodder, that natural charisma that anyone who met her still talks about to this day, as we mentioned. She was known for being super tactile. She'd touch your arm while she talked to you, call you honey. And that's the kind of the stuff that's almost impossible to translate on screen, that why is this person magnetic quality. But I think that the show is getting closer than anything we've seen before. I'm just glad that we're not seeing Carolyn the Ice Queen on screen, not seeing her, at least not yet, snorting cocaine, though we do see some of her friends on screen doing drugs when they're out, which is not abnormal in the 90s.
Yeah, you're in New York City, 90s.
At a club.
I was not pearl clutching.
No, on a whole, it's been a sympathetic portrayal, and I'm glad that they're not doing what has already in the past, and again, demonizing her to make her husband appear shinier, better in comparison. I am enjoying seeing those things that her friends and people who met her and knew her highlight, and you're seeing that on screen, which is a breath of fresh air. And I hope that between that and the book, that it will slowly change the perception that some people have. I'm sure there's still going to be the people who grew up in the 90s who have that, as you said, fanatical hold on JFK Jr. and no woman is good enough for him. But for the rest of us, that we can start seeing her in shades of gray and nuance.
I think it's just interesting how it feels like with the Kennedys, and then, as I said, with the Princes of Wales, there's this almost like this parental need to have this approval of whoever they are with, just because they always see little JFK Jr. saluting at his dad's funeral, and we see, the Princes of Wales
walking behind in the funeral procession.
And so, I do know the visual of that is a huge part of it. How many royals we've talked about have lost people in the past, including William the Conqueror, left behind as an 8-year-old. You don't have that media, those visceral images that make you be like, oh my gosh, like, even if they're not an orphan, right? They still had parents. There's this protective swoop of the nation of, this is our child, and the person he marries needs to be up to his quality. And If anything, they make that person, despite any of their flaws, Princess of Wales or JFK Jr., sweep those things under. Any flaws that they have
Yes.
are because of their partner.
That's one of the things I am a little bit worried about for the show. I had on my list is turning the story into the sanitized Hallmark Channel version of real life, because you do see they've cleaned up some timelines around Daryl, Hannah, and Carolyn. Some of that's understood, just part of TV. You don't have the time or really the appetite to unpack the very messy, very overlapping relationships that JFK Jr. had with not only both these women, but he also had women like Julie Baker, another ex. She was in the mix around that same time. It shows a little bit of the overlap, but he really was seeing Carolyn on the down low, on the DL, as he was dating Daryl, and sort of vice versa. He always, always, always seemed to have women on rotation because he was, he's JFK Jr. and he looked like that and he could.
I had read, as I've been watching the show, and as we'll dive in more on our Patreon episode deep dives about that, them saying, of course, we have limited time. Viewers aren't, going to want to see basically back, forth, back, forth, back, forth. It's both, like you said, makes sense for a medium like television, but in a way it's also sanitized.
I think it's helping. It's helping him.
Helping him, just because viewers don't want to see the back, forth, then it simplifies it and makes it into a
love story. The love story.
Right. Makes it Daryl Hannah versus Carolyn Bessette Kennedy.
They want to present this beautiful, more stylized version of the relationship. The real story had these stops and starts, and none of that really fits neatly into this glossy love story. There's one moment I really wish they'd kept from these years where there was the overlap. So at one point, Carolyn's mother, Anne Freeman, she sent her a tabloid photo of John and Daryl together at one of Daryl's movie premieres with a note that just said, "Carolyn, please move on with your life." And she added a little frowny face, which makes me laugh. Oh, that would have been such a perfect moment in the show. It's like almost too good to be true. I just can't believe they didn't include it.
That is perplexing, because the scene that we have, her mom.
Yeah, we do have.
And her mom seeming critical and pretty much like, Carolyn,
oh, you're back with John.
You'd think a quick flash of a scene like that would be not very long.
You do see that in Calvin Klein, somebody has left out. I think it's a newspaper or magazine. So you see something similar. Yeah. But I'm like, that would have been just such a perfect moment for the show. And it would have been the perfect moment to introduce Anne Freeman, Carolyn's mom, who she is incredibly close to. I was excited because Anne does appear in episode 4 with Lauren Bessette, Carolyn's sister. I'm not trying to be too picky about it, but it's just something like that. I would have loved. You're like,
how did you not? How did you not? Especially because Carolyn at the dinner with his friends ahead of time is like, oh, you do not cancel on my mom. So like setting her up as this big figure in her life. And so having something like that, I think, would have solidified and really shown that her mom was not fawning over like, oh my gosh, you're dating JFK Jr.
Yes.
You think because her mom being of that generation would almost been like,
yeah, oh, you're dating a Kennedy, do whatever you can to keep him.
Right, exactly.
Girl, keep him on the hook. No.
Right, let's marry you. I've been from day one almost thinking of Jackie O's family. From day one, you're going to be marrying into higher society. Who are we scoping out? Not at all that. Very, very, very skeptical of John.
When we get to the wedding episode, there is a famous Anne Freeman story surrounding the wedding. Again, not trying to be too picky about it, but it's just things like that. Also, by fudging the timelines, they skipped over one of the earliest red flags in John and Carolyn's relationship, which was John not introducing Carolyn to Jackie, which was a big deal to Carolyn, and it was a wound that never really closed. Remember, we talked about how there was one time where they almost ran into each other at a restaurant and he shuffled Carolyn in the back so that Jackie wouldn't see her. Carolyn had these abandonment issues, which they hint a little bit because of her father. Mm-hmm. That she would always be the one to leave the relationship before she got dumped.
Yep.
So the idea that she was never good enough to introduce to the Jackie Kennedy, that hurt, and she never got over it. It feels like they skimmed right past that to keep things more palatable, more romantic, more yearning.
Right.
It doesn't reflect well on John that he was essentially hiding Carolyn away.
No, with the timeline, it makes it seem like Carolyn was a very, very casual, somebody who was seen or pursuing. And the show wouldn't have made sense if she was saying, why aren't you introducing me to your mother? It would have been like,
why would I do that?
Right. With that timeline, it made it seem very much like it was Daryl Hannah who was the one who was the slighted in not meeting, or in that case, the dinner, her not coming to the dinner. But it completely took Carolyn out of the equation. She doesn't mention anything about expecting, because it wouldn't have been expected in the show because their relationship really hadn't been established at all.
Yeah, it was something really quick. Oh, you had gone on 1 or 2 dates.
Exactly.
Tops. And then Daryl, it became more serious again with her. There really was a lot more serious overlap. And Carolyn knew, not to take it away from her, because she certainly knew that he had a girlfriend. Whether Daryl was aware as well, who knows? It's just smoothing things over. I feel like that's just why we got the timeline we got, was just to make things a little bit easier, not only to understand, but if it's a great love story, cheating and overlapping relationships, that's not very palatable for a lot of people. I have a hunch that's why they fudged some timelines here in the early 90s.
Yeah, and I feel like it was, okay, we're going to pick one person that John was very hesitant to bring anyone around, Jackie. And Jackie didn't think necessarily certain people were good enough to at least marry him, whether or not dating him. That's a different thing. But it was like, okay, we're going to do that with Daryl Hannah. We're not going to do that with Carolyn. I don't know if whether it's because of repetitiveness or, like you said, because of timeline, but I think it does, though, take out, and it'll make me curious later, because obviously as their relationship and the marriage goes on, we're already seeing her. And you said already talked about the abandonment piece. In the episode, him asking about heartbreak, like when she had her heart broken and she's like, I'll tell you when it happens or whatever.
Yeah. Very Carolyn. I love that.
I was like, oh, that clocks with what Aaron had mentioned in our previous episode. I think they're trying to show commonalities of both of them having lost a parent in some way. Obviously, JFK Jr. also has the way overarching JFK loss, but also this more recent loss of his confidant, his very close mother.
Mm-hmm. She was very involved in his life.
I'm just curious how they will, because those episodes aren't out later. Is it going to just be addressed as in Carolyn being, oh, I really wish I could have met Jackie? I don't know how they're going to address that, because you would think, especially as you get closer to the marriage and the wedding, obviously when you talk about weddings, parents tend to play a big part. I'm curious how that will play out.